In a rain-soaked city, a single umbrella shelters two hearts until a whispered confession begins to unravel everything they tried to hide. "Don't move," Jungkook said, his voice low and strained as if the rain itself might overhear him. The city pulsed around them, neon lights fractured across wet pavement, car tires slicing through shallow puddles, the hum of distant traffic vibrating like a restless heartbeat. The film crew had scattered, shouting over the sudden downpour, scrambling to protect equipment to save the scene to salvage time. But in the middle of the chaos, Jungkook had stopped. And he had taken Jimin with him. Under one trembling umbrella barely wide enough for both, they stood too close, too still, too exposed. Jimin could feel it, the shift, not in the weather, not in the scene, but in Jungkook himself. It was subtle at first. The way his grip tightened just a fraction around the umbrella handle. The way his breathing changed, uneven, like he had been running even though he hadn't moved. "You're going to ruin the shot," Jimin murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. His eyes flickered toward the distant figures of the crew, blurred by rain and light. "They're waiting." Jungkook didn't look away from him. Not even for a second. Of all the places they had filmed, all the cities, all the artificial streets dressed to look like something else, this one felt too real, too alive. The rain smelled like metal and asphalt, like something unfinished. It seeped into everything, clothes, skin, breath, until there was no clear boundary between the outside world and what lived inside their chests. "I don't care about the shot," Jungkook said quietly. That was the first crack. Jimin felt it instantly, like glass under pressure. Jungkook had always cared, too much sometimes, about perfection, about timing, about the way things looked from the outside. He was meticulous, almost painfully so, the kind of person who would redo a single line until it felt exactly right. But now he wasn't acting like that person. Jimin tilted his head slightly, studying him. There was something in Jungkook's eyes he hadn't seen before, or maybe he had but had chosen not to recognize it. Fear. Not the kind that runs, the kind that stays. "What's wrong with you?" Jimin asked, softer now. The umbrella shifted slightly as Jungkook adjusted his grip, bringing it lower, closer, enclosing them in a smaller world. The rain intensified, drumming against the thin fabric above them like 1,000 urgent knocks. For a moment Jungkook didn't answer. He just looked at Jimin. Really looked at him. As if trying to memorize something that was about to disappear. Jimin swallowed, suddenly aware of every inch of space between them, or rather the lack of it. Their shoulders brushed. Their breaths mingled, warm against the cool, damp air. A drop of water slid from Jungkook's hair down the side of his face, catching briefly at his jaw before falling. "You ever think," Jungkook began, his voice almost lost beneath the rain, "that maybe we've been walking past the same place over and over, without realizing it's the one place we were supposed to stop?" Jimin blinked. The question didn't feel like a line from the script. It felt too raw, too unscripted. "You're improvising again," Jimin said, attempting a smile, but it faltered halfway. "The director's going to." "I'm not talking about the scene." The words landed between them, heavy and undeniable. Jimin's chest tightened. Something inside him stirred, something he had buried so deep it had almost convinced him it didn't exist anymore. Almost. But not completely. "Jungkook," he started, but the name felt fragile in his mouth. Jungkook inhaled sharply as if bracing himself against something unseen. His fingers twitched slightly around the umbrella handle, then stilled. "Of all the places I've been," he said, his voice quieter now, steadier in a way that made it more dangerous, "you're the only one I've always wanted to stop by." The world didn't stop. The rain didn't pause. The city didn't care. But for Jimin, everything shifted. The words echoed in his mind, repeating, reshaping, refusing to be ignored. They weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. They carried a weight that pressed against his ribs, against his lungs, against every carefully constructed boundary he had built over the years. He should say something. He knew he should. Laugh it off, deflect, turn it into a joke, a misunderstanding, a moment that could be erased or rewritten. That's what he had always done. But this time Jungkook wasn't looking away. There was no escape in his gaze, no room for interpretation, just truth, bare and unguarded. And that terrified him. "You don't mean that?" Jimin said finally, though his voice betrayed him, trembling at the edges. Jungkook didn't hesitate. I do. Simple, direct, irrefutable. Jimin's breath hitched. Memories flickered through his mind, uninvited. Late nights in unfamiliar cities. Quiet conversations in hotel rooms where the walls felt too thin and the silence too loud. The way Jungkook would sometimes linger just a second too long, say something that almost crossed a line, then pull back as if nothing had happened. All the moments that had felt like something more. All the moments Jimin had chosen to ignore. You're confused, Jimin insisted, but the words felt hollow even to him. It's just the atmosphere, the scene, the rain. It's not the rain. Jungkook stepped closer. The umbrella tilted, letting a thin stream of water slip down between them, but neither of them moved to fix it. It's never been the rain, he continued, his voice steady now, anchored in something deeper than impulse. I just didn't know how to say it before. Jimin's heart pounded, loud and relentless. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not like this. There were rules, unspoken but understood, lines that weren't meant to be crossed, feelings that weren't meant to be named. Because numbing them made them real. And reality changed everything. You're going to regret this, Jimin whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was warning Jungkook or himself. Jungkook's lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something else, something more. But instead he just shook his head. No, he said softly, I think not saying it would have been the thing I'd regret. The honesty in his voice was disarming. Jimin looked away for the first time, his gaze falling to the rain-slicked ground beneath them. The reflections blurred and shifted, lights bending into shapes that didn't quite make sense. Just like everything else. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself, trying to find something solid to hold onto. But there was nothing. Only the rain. Only Jungkook. Only the truth he had been avoiding for far too long. You shouldn't have said that, Jimin murmured. I know. A pause. Then why did you? Jungkook hesitated just for a second. Then, because you were about to walk away again. Jimin's chest tightened painfully. He hadn't realized it, not consciously, but Jungkook was right. He had been ready to step back, to return to the set, to pretend this moment didn't exist. Like he always did. The realization hit harder than he expected. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Jimin looked up again. Jungkook was still there. Still watching him. Still waiting. The rain softened, just slightly, as if the city itself was holding its breath. And for the first time, Jimin didn't look away. The umbrella trembled between them, not from the rain, but from the way Jungkook's hand had started to shake. Jimin noticed. Of course he did. You're crossing a line, Jimin said, his voice lower now, sharper, but there was something beneath it, something dangerously close to panic. You don't even realize what you're saying. I realize it more than ever, Jungkook shot back, and for the first time there was heat in his voice. Not hesitation, not uncertainty, something raw, something that had clearly been building for far too long. You just don't want to hear it. That's not true. Then look at me and tell me I'm wrong. Jimin froze. The rain filled the silence between them, louder now, as if it were trying to drown out the tension that had become impossible to ignore. Somewhere in the distance, someone from the crew shouted Jungkook's name, but it felt far away, irrelevant, like a different world entirely. Jimin didn't respond. Didn't move. And Jungkook noticed that too. A humorless laugh escaped him, quiet but bitter. That's what I thought. Stop it, Jimin snapped, his control slipping just enough to be noticeable. You're making this into something it's not. And what is it then? Jungkook stepped closer again, his voice tightening. Tell me what this is, Jimin. Because I'm tired of pretending. I don't feel it every time you walk away like nothing happened. Jimin's breath caught. Nothing happened, he insisted, but it sounded weaker this time, fragile, like something that could shatter if pushed just a little harder. Jungkook didn't hesitate. Then why do you always look back? That hit hard. Jimin's lips parted but no words came out. His mind scrambled for something, an excuse, a deflection, anything, but everything felt insufficient under the weight of Jungkook's gaze. You think I didn't notice? Jungkook continued, quieter now but somehow even more intense. Every single time, you walk away and then you stop just for a second like you're waiting for something. Jimin shook his head quickly. You're imagining things. I wish I was. The honesty in that broke something. Jimin turned away abruptly, running a hand through his damp hair, his fingers trembling slightly. You don't get to do this, he muttered. You don't get to just say things like that and expect everything to change. I don't expect anything, Jungkook replied. I just couldn't keep lying. That's not lying, Jimin snapped, turning back to face him, his eyes flashing now. That's called knowing when to stop. Stop what? Jungkook demanded. Stop before you ruin everything. The words rang out louder than either of them expected. For a moment, even the rain seemed to falter. Jungkook stared at him, something flickering across his face, hurt, sharp, and immediate. Ruined, he repeated quietly. Jimin swallowed hard, realizing too late how it sounded, but he didn't take it back. Yes, he said, more controlled now but no less firm. You think this, whatever this is, doesn't come with consequences. You think we can just cross that line and nothing changes. Things have already changed, Jungkook said. That's exactly the problem. Jimin stepped back, the umbrella shifting awkwardly between them, no longer shielding them properly. Rain began to soak through his clothes, cold against his skin, but he didn't seem to notice. You're not thinking clearly, he continued, his voice rising, desperation creeping in. This is a moment. It's intense, it's confusing, but it doesn't mean anything beyond that. Jungkook's expression hardened. It means something to me. The simplicity of that made it worse. Jimin shook his head again, more forcefully this time, as if he could physically reject the weight of those words. You'll regret it, he said. Maybe not now, but you will, and when you do, you'll wish you never said anything. And what about you? Jungkook asked suddenly. Jimin faltered. What about me? Jungkook stepped even closer, close enough that Jimin could see the way his eyes glistened, not just from the rain. What are you going to regret? He pressed, because I know it's not nothing, don't lie to me like that. I'm not lying, Jimin insisted, but his voice cracked at the edges, betraying him completely. Jungkook's jaw tightened, then prove it. The challenge hung in the air. Heavy. Dangerous. Jimin's heart pounded so loudly he was sure Jungkook could hear it. Prove what? He asked, though he already knew. That you feel nothing, Jungkook said. Silence. A long suffocating silence. Jimin stared at him, his mind racing, his chest tightening with every second that passed. He could end this. He knew he could. All it would take was one firm statement, one decisive step back, one clear boundary. But his body didn't move. His voice didn't come. Because deep down, he knew he couldn't lie that convincingly. Jungkook saw it. Of course he did. A flicker of something hope, fragile and dangerous, passed through his expression. And that was enough. Without thinking, without giving himself time to hesitate, Jungkook reached out and grabbed Jimin's wrist. The contact was electric. Immediate. Jimin's breath hitched sharply, his entire body tensing at once. What are you? Don't run this time, Jungkook said, his voice rough, almost pleading now. Just stay, just for once stay. Jimin stared at where their hands met, his thoughts spiraling. This was exactly what he had been avoiding. This moment. This choice. If he stayed, everything would change. If he left, nothing would, and yet everything would still feel different. You don't understand, Jimin whispered, his voice trembling now. It's not that simple. Then make me understand, Jungkook said. I can't. Why not? Because if I do, Jimin stopped himself, his breath uneven. Jungkook's grip tightened slightly. If you do what? Jimin closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering the courage to say something he had buried for far too long. The rain softened again, falling quieter now, almost gentle. When he opened his eyes, there was something different in them. Something raw. Something real. Because if I do, Jimin said slowly, each word deliberate, I won't be able to pretend anymore. Jungkook's breath caught. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world narrowed to just the two of them, standing there in the rain, caught between what was safe and what was true. Jungkook took a step closer. The umbrella slipped from his hand, falling to the ground with a soft, forgotten sound. Neither of them noticed. Then don't pretend, Jungkook whispered. Jimin's heart pounded violently in his chest. Everything inside him screamed to step back. To end this. To protect what they had. But something stronger held him in place. Something he had been denying for far too long. You're asking me to risk everything, Jimin said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook didn't look away. I'm asking you to be honest. The rain soaked through them completely now, cold and relentless, but neither of them moved. Time stretched. Breath by breath. Second by second. Until finally, Jimin let out a shaky exhale. And instead of pulling away, he stepped closer. Jimin's step forward shattered the last fragile distance between them, and for a moment neither of them breathed. The rain clung to their skin, tracing every line of tension, every unspoken word that had been building for far too long. Jungkook's hand was still wrapped around Jimin's wrist, but now it didn't feel like restraint. It felt like the only thing anchoring him to reality. You shouldn't have done that, Jungkook whispered, but his voice betrayed him. It wasn't a warning, it was disbelief. It was hope, sharp and terrifying. Jimin let out a quiet, unsteady breath, his gaze dropping briefly to where their bodies nearly touched, then rising again, locking onto Jungkook's eyes with something that could no longer be hidden. I told you, Jimin said, his voice trembling despite the control he was trying to maintain, if I stop pretending, I won't know how to go back. Then don't go back. It came too quickly, too easily. Jimin shook his head immediately, almost instinctively. You say that like it's simple. It is, Jungkook insisted, stepping even closer, his voice gaining intensity again. We're the ones making it complicated. Jimin let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You really believe that? I know it. No, Jimin said, his tone sharpening, something defensive rising up again, clashing violently with everything else he was feeling. You want to believe that, that's different. Jungkook's expression shifted, frustration flickering across his face. Why are you fighting this so hard? Because I have to. The words came out louder than intended, cutting through the rain. Jungkook flinched slightly, but he didn't step back. You don't have to, he said, quieter now but firm. Jimin's chest rose and fell rapidly. You don't understand what's at stake. Then explain it to me instead of shutting me out. I'm not shutting you out, Jimin snapped, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. Jungkook let out a sharp exhale, dragging a hand through his soaked hair in frustration. That's exactly what you're doing. Every time it gets real, you pull away. Every time it means something, you act like it doesn't. Because it's safer that way. The confession slipped out before Jimin could stop it. Both of them froze. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and raw. Jungkook's voice softened, but it didn't lose its intensity. Safer for who? Jimin didn't answer immediately. His gaze dropped again, his thoughts spiraling, memories pressing in on him, moments he had carefully locked away, choices he had justified, fears he had never spoken out loud. For both of us, he said finally, though it sounded more like something he was trying to convince himself of. Jungkook studied him for a long moment, his eyes searching, dissecting every expression, every hesitation. That's not what it looks like, he said quietly. Jimin's jaw tightened. What does it look like then? It looks like you're scared. The word landed heavier than anything else. Jimin's head snapped up. I'm not scared. Jungkook didn't even blink. Then why are you shaking? Jimin stilled. He hadn't noticed it until now, but Jungkook was right. His hands, his breath, even the way his shoulders tensed, everything was betraying him. I'm not scared of this, Jimin said, but his voice wavered just enough to weaken the denial. Jungkook took a slow step closer, his voice dropping. Then what are you scared of? Jimin hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. Jungkook's expression softened just slightly, but it made his next words even more dangerous. Is it me, he asked. Jimin's breath hitched. No, he said quickly, almost too quickly, it's not you. Then what? Jimin closed his eyes for a brief second as if trying to gather himself, but when he opened them again there was something more exposed there, something that had been buried too deep for too long. Everything that comes after, he admitted. The rain seemed quieter now, softer, as if the world itself was listening. Jungkook didn't move, and what exactly do you think comes after? Jimin let out a slow, uneven breath. You really want to know?
Yes.
There was no hesitation in Jungkook's answer this time. So Jimin gave it to him. It gets complicated, he said, his voice low but steady now, grounded in truth. People notice things, they start asking questions, they start making assumptions, and suddenly it's not just about us anymore, it's about everything around us. Jungkook's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting Jimin continue. We lose control, Jimin said, over the narrative, over how people see us, over how we see ourselves, and once that happens, there's no going back. The weight of his words settled heavily between them. Jungkook absorbed it, every piece of it, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, is that really what you're afraid of? He asked quietly. Jimin frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean, Jungkook took a small step forward, closing the last bit of space between them, his voice dropping even lower, more personal. Are you afraid of all that, or are you afraid of how much this actually means to you? Jimin's heart stuttered. That's not. Because if it didn't mean anything, Jungkook continued, cutting him off gently but firmly, you wouldn't be this conflicted. Jimin opened his mouth to argue. But no words came out. Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. You wouldn't be standing here right now.
Silence.
Jimin felt it again, that pull, that undeniable force that kept drawing him back no matter how hard he tried to resist. You think you figured me out, Jimin said finally, but his voice had lost its earlier sharpness. I think you've been trying to figure yourself out, Jungkook replied. That hit deeper than anything else. Jimin looked away again, his chest tightening, his thoughts unraveling faster than he could control. You don't get it, he whispered. Then help me understand, Jungkook said, softer now. Jimin hesitated, caught between instinct and honesty. And for once, he didn't choose to run. I've spent so long convincing myself that this, he gestured vaguely between them, his hand trembling slightly, was just a phase, just something that would pass if I ignored it long enough. Jungkook's expression shifted, something pained flickering across it, but he stayed silent. But it didn't, Jimin continued, his voice growing quieter, more vulnerable. It just stayed, and the more I tried to bury it, the stronger it got. The confession hung between them, fragile and irreversible. Jungkook swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. Then why fight it now? Jimin looked at him, really looked at him, and this time there was no denial left in his eyes. Because if I let myself have this, he said slowly, I don't think I'll ever be able to let it go. The honesty in that was almost unbearable. Jungkook's breath caught, his grip loosening slightly on Jimin's wrist, not to let go, but to soften, to reassure. Maybe you're not supposed to let it go, he said. Jimin's pulse raced. You don't know what you're asking, he whispered. Jungkook's gaze softened, but his voice didn't waver. I know exactly what I'm asking. A long silence followed. The kind that changes things. Jimin could feel it, the shift, the breaking point, the moment where everything they had been avoiding was finally demanding to be faced. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted his free hand. For a second, it hovered in the air between them. Then, he let it rest against Jungkook's chest. The contact was soft, but the impact was anything but. Jungkook froze, his breath catching sharply as if the touch had knocked the air out of him completely. Jimin could feel his heartbeat. Fast. Unsteady. Real. This, Jimin said quietly, his voice almost lost in the rain, is exactly why I'm scared. Jungkook didn't move. Didn't speak. He just stood there, letting the moment exist exactly as it was, raw, fragile, and dangerously close to something neither of them could take back. And for the first time, neither of them tried to stop it. Jimin's hand remained pressed against Jungkook's chest, and neither of them dared to move, as if even the slightest shift might shatter whatever fragile truth had finally surfaced between them. Jungkook's heartbeat was still racing beneath Jimin's palm. Too fast. Too loud. Too real. You feel that? Jimin whispered, his voice trembling despite the calm he tried to maintain. That's exactly what I mean. This isn't something small, this isn't something we can just brush off later. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his breath warm against the cold rain. I'm not trying to brush it off. But you're acting like it won't cost us anything, Jimin replied, his fingers curling slightly against Jungkook's shirt, gripping it without realizing. Like we can just decide this and everything will fall into place. Jungkook's eyes darkened, not with anger but with something heavier, determination. Maybe it will cost us, he admitted. But since when have you been the kind of person who walks away just because something's difficult? Jimin let out a quiet, almost bitter laugh. You really don't see it, do you? Then make me see it. Jimin's gaze sharpened, something conflicted and intense flashing across his face. Fine, he said, his voice tightening. You want the truth, here it is. He stepped back suddenly, pulling his hand away. The loss of contact felt immediate. Cold. Jungkook's expression shifted, but he didn't interrupt. Jimin ran a hand through his wet hair, packing once, twice, like he was trying to outrun his own thoughts. You think this is just about feelings, Jimin said, his voice rising slightly, charged now, alive with tension. But it's not. It's about timing, it's about where we are in our lives, it's about everything we've built, everything people expect from us. Jungkook's jaw tightened. So we're supposed to live based on expectations now. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying, Jimin? Jungkook fired back, his voice cutting through the rain. Because right now it sounds like you're more afraid of what people might think than what you actually feel. Jimin froze. For a split second, something in his expression cracked, anger yes, but underneath it, something more vulnerable. That's not fair, he said quietly. Then tell me what is. Jimin turned back to him, his eyes blazing now, no longer hiding the storm inside. What's fair is protecting what we have before it turns into something we can't control. Jungkook stepped forward, closing the distance again almost instinctively. What we have is already out of control. The words hit like a collision. Jimin inhaled sharply, his composure slipping further. No, he said, shaking his head. It's only out of control because you said it out loud. Before that, we had a choice. We could ignore it. We could keep things the way they were. And you call that living? Jungkook's voice dropped, rough and disbelieving, pretending every time something real happens between us. Jimin didn't answer immediately. Because he couldn't. Because Jungkook wasn't entirely wrong. That's better than losing everything, Jimin said finally, but even to his own ears it sounded like a compromise he no longer believed in. Jungkook stared at him, something unreadable flickering across his face before it hardened into something more resolute. You're not afraid of losing everything, he said slowly. You're afraid of choosing me and finding out it changes you. Jimin's breath caught. That's not. You said it yourself, Jungkook continued, stepping closer again, his voice quieter but sharper than before. If you let yourself have this, you won't be able to let it go. That's not fear of consequences, Jimin, that's fear of how much it matters.
Silence.
Heavy. Unforgiving. Jimin's eyes flickered, searching Jungkook's face as if trying to find a flaw in his argument, something to push back against. But there was nothing. Only truth. And that made it worse. You don't get to decide what I'm afraid of, Jimin said, but the strength in his voice had weakened. No, Jungkook agreed, but I can see it. Jimin clenched his jaw, his emotions pulling him in opposite directions, one side urging him to hold his ground to protect the life he understood, the other pulling him toward something uncertain but undeniably real. You think this is easy for me? Jimin asked, his voice low, strained. You think I haven't thought about this, about us, about what it would mean if we crossed that line? Jungkook's expression softened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. I have, Jimin continued, his voice breaking just enough to reveal the weight behind it. More times than I can count, and every time it ends the same way. How? Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin hesitated. Then almost reluctantly he answered. With me losing you. The words hung between them, sharp and final. Jungkook's brow furrowed. That doesn't make any sense. It does, Jimin insisted, stepping closer again, his voice urgent now. Because once this becomes real, once it's out in the open, it changes everything. The way we work together, the way we talk, the way we exist around each other. And if something goes wrong, he swallowed hard, there's no going back to what we had before. Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. So you'd rather never have it at all? Jimin didn't answer. And that silence was louder than anything else. The rain continued to fall, steady and relentless, soaking through every layer until there was nothing left to hide behind. Jungkook stepped even closer, his voice dropping to something almost fragile. "I don't want to be just something you almost had," he said. Jimin's chest tightened painfully. "You're not," he replied quickly, instinctively. "Then what am I?" Jungkook asked. The question lingered unanswered. Jimin opened his mouth, closed it again. Because no matter what he said, it wouldn't be enough. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his shoulders rising and falling as if he were trying to steady himself. "Do you remember the first time we met?" he asked suddenly. The shift caught Jimin off guard. "What?" "The first time," Jungkook repeated, his voice softer now but no less intense. "Before all of this, before everything got complicated." Jimin frowned slightly, confused, but something in Jungkook's tone made him answer anyway. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You looked at me like I was something temporary," Jungkook said. Jimin blinked, surprised. "That's not true." "It is," Jungkook insisted gently. "But I didn't care, because I thought if I stayed long enough, if I proved myself, maybe one day you'd see me differently." Jimin's expression shifted, something unsettled moving through him. "And now?" he asked. Jungkook met his gaze, unwavering. "Now I know you do," he said. Jimin's breath caught again. "Which is exactly why you're trying so hard to deny it." The truth of that struck deeper than anything else had so far. Jimin looked away, his thoughts unraveling, his defenses wearing thinner with every passing second. "I'm not denying it," he whispered. Jungkook stepped closer, his voice barely above the rain. "Then stop acting like you are." Jimin's chest rose and fell rapidly. Every instinct told him to step back. To end this. To regain control. But instead, he stayed. Right there. Right in front of Jungkook. And that, more than anything, said everything. The silence between them no longer felt empty, it felt volatile, like something waiting to explode. Jimin's breath came unevenly, his chest rising and falling as if the air itself had become too heavy to hold. He hadn't stepped back, not this time, and Jungkook noticed. Of course he noticed. "You're still here," Jungkook said quietly, but there was something dangerous beneath the softness, something that sounded almost like disbelief. Jimin let out a slow breath, his voice barely steady. "I told you I wouldn't know how to pretend anymore." "Then don't," Jungkook replied immediately, his tone sharper now, more urgent. "Stop holding yourself back like this is something you have to survive instead of something you actually want." Jimin's eyes flickered, something defensive rising again. "You think I want this to be complicated?" "No," Jungkook said, "I think you want it to be simple, but you don't trust it when it is." That hit too close. Jimin clenched his jaw, looking away for a moment, but Jungkook didn't let him retreat, not physically, not emotionally. "Look at me," Jungkook said. It wasn't loud. But it wasn't a request either. Jimin hesitated, then slowly turned back. Their eyes locked again, and this time there was no shield left, no distance, no safe place to hide behind. "Tell me you don't feel it," Jungkook said, his voice low, controlled, but shaking at the edges. "Say it clearly, no excuses, no explanations, just say you don't feel anything when you're with me." Jimin's lips parted. No sound came out. Jungkook took a step closer, his presence overwhelming now, his voice pressing harder. "Say it." Jimin stopped himself, his throat tightening. "I can't." The confession dropped between them like a spark in dry air. Jungkook inhaled sharply, his control slipping for the first time. "Then why are you still fighting me?" "Because I don't know what happens if I stop." Jimin's voice cracked as he stepped forward too, closing the distance again as if he couldn't stand the space between them anymore. "You think this ends well?" Jimin continued, his voice rising, raw now, unfiltered. "You think we just fall into this and everything works out, that nothing breaks, that no one gets hurt?" "I don't care if it's messy," Jungkook shot back. "I don't care if it's difficult or complicated or even painful, at least it would be real." "It is real," Jimin snapped. "Then why does it feel like I'm the only one willing to admit it?" The words cut deep. Jimin froze, his breath catching, his expression faltering. "You're not the only one," he said, quieter now but no less intense. You say things without thinking about what they'll cost. Jungkook let out a short, bitter laugh. No, I say things because I've already thought about the cost, I just decided it was worth it. Jimin stared at him, something shifting again, something cracking open wider than before. You don't get to decide that alone, Jimin said. I'm not, Jungkook replied, stepping closer until there was barely any space left between them. That's why I'm standing here asking you to decide it with me. The rain had softened again, but the tension hadn't. It wrapped around them thick and suffocating. Jimin's hands trembled slightly at his sides, he didn't even try to hide it anymore. You're asking me to risk everything for something we don't even understand yet, Jimin said. Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. No, I'm asking you to stop running from something you already understand. Jimin shook his head, but it was weaker this time, less certain. You don't know that. I do, Jungkook said firmly, because every time I get too close you don't push me away immediately, you hesitate, you look at me like you're about to say something you're not supposed to say. Jimin's breath hitched again. And then you stop yourself, Jungkook continued, not because it's not there but because you're afraid of what happens if it is. Jimin's chest tightened painfully. You make it sound so simple, he whispered. It's not simple, Jungkook admitted, it's just honest. Jimin closed his eyes for a second, as if the weight of everything was finally too much to hold. When he opened them again, something had changed. Not completely, but enough. Fine, Jimin said, his voice low, steady in a way it hadn't been before. You want honesty. Jungkook didn't speak. Didn't move. He just waited. Jimin took a slow step forward until their foreheads were almost touching, their breaths colliding in the space between them. I think about you, Jimin said. Jungkook's breath caught. More than I should, Jimin continued, his voice quiet but unwavering now. At times I shouldn't, in ways I tried not to. The air shifted. Something irreversible unfolding. I notice things, Jimin went on, his gaze locked onto Jungkook's, no escape now. The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention, the way you hesitate before you say something like you're choosing your words carefully just for me. Jungkook didn't move. Didn't even breathe. And I hate it, Jimin added suddenly. That broke the stillness. Jungkook blinked, confusion flickering across his face. You hate it. Jimin let out a shaky breath, because it makes it harder to ignore, it makes it impossible to pretend this is just nothing. Jungkook's expression softened, something deeper settling in his eyes. Then why are you still trying to ignore it, he asked gently. Jimin swallowed hard. Because I don't trust myself with it. That was the truth. Raw, unfiltered. Jungkook's gaze didn't leave his. What are you afraid you'll do? Jimin hesitated. Then, without thinking, he reached up and grabbed Jungkook's collar, pulling him closer. The movement was sudden. Sharp. Desperate. Jungkook's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard. You want to know? Jimin whispered, his voice barely controlled now, trembling with something intense and dangerous. I'm afraid I won't stop. The words hung between them, electric. Jungkook's breath hitched, his hands instinctively lifting, hovering for a second before settling against Jimin's arms, steadying him, grounding both of them in the moment. Then don't, Jungkook said, his voice barely a whisper. Jimin's heart pounded violently. Everything inside him screamed that this was the point of no return. That once he crossed this, there would be no undoing it. No pretending. No safe distance. But Jungkook didn't pull away. Didn't hesitate. He just stayed. Right there. With him. In that. That was enough. Jimin's grip tightened slightly. His breath faltered. And then, slowly, he leaned in. Jimin stopped just before their lips could meet. The distance between them was almost non-existent, so close that their breaths tangled, so close that one more second, one less hesitation, and everything would collapse into something neither of them could undo. Jungkook didn't move. Didn't pull away. But he didn't close the gap either. He waited. And that waiting, it said everything. Jimin's grip on his collar tightened, his fingers trembling as if they were holding onto the last thread of control he had left. His heart was pounding so violently it felt like it might break through his ribs. Say something, Jimin whispered, his voice barely steady, almost desperate. If you say one wrong thing right now, I swear I'll walk away. Jungkook's eyes flickered, searching his face not for weakness, but for truth. I don't want you to walk away, he said quietly. That's not enough, Jimin shot back immediately, his voice shaking now. You've been saying what you want this whole time, say something that makes me stop. Jungkook inhaled slowly, his hands still resting lightly on Jimin's arms, grounding him but also holding him there. You won't stop, Jungkook said. Jimin froze. The certainty in his voice hit harder than anything else could have. You don't believe that, Jimin muttered, but it sounded fragile. I do, Jungkook replied, his gaze unwavering, because if you really wanted to stop, you wouldn't be this close. The truth landed like a blow. Jimin's breath faltered, his chest tightening as something inside him finally started to unravel completely. Then why aren't you doing anything? Jimin demanded suddenly, his voice breaking through the tension, sharp and raw. Why are you just standing there like this doesn't matter? Jungkook's expression shifted, something deeper, more vulnerable surfacing. Because it matters too much, he said. Jimin blinked, caught off guard. Jungkook's grip softened slightly, but he didn't let go. If I move right now, if I close that distance, his voice dropped, quieter, more fragile, I don't want it to be something you regret 5 seconds later. The words hit deeper than Jimin expected. For a moment, everything stilled again. The rain. The city. The noise. All of it faded beneath the weight of what Jungkook had just said. You think I'd regret it? Jimin asked, softer now, something wounded slipping into his voice. Jungkook hesitated. And that hesitation. That was enough. Jimin let out a quiet, breathless laugh, but there was no humor in it, only something sharp and aching. Wow, he murmured, pulling back just slightly, not enough to break contact completely, but enough to create space. So after all this, you still think I'm that weak? That's not what I meant, Jungkook said quickly, his voice tightening. Then what did you mean? Jimin pressed, his eyes flashing now, emotions shifting again, rising dangerously. I meant I care about what this means for you, Jungkook replied, his tone firm now, no hesitation. Not just what it means for me. Jimin stared at him, something conflicted flickering in his expression. And what if I don't need you to decide that for me? Jimin challenged. I'm not deciding, Jungkook said. I'm making sure you're not doing something you'll try to erase later. That word erase cut deeper than anything else. Jimin's breath hitched. You really think I'd do that? He asked quietly. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. In that silence, it said everything. Jimin stepped back fully this time. The distance returned, cold and immediate. Rain filled the space between them again, heavier now, louder, like it was rushing in to replace everything that had almost happened. Unbelievable, Jimin muttered under his breath, running a hand through his soaked hair again, his movements sharper now, restless. You push me to the edge, you make me say things I've never said out loud, and then you hesitate like I'm the one who's going to run. Jungkook's jaw tightened, because you always do. I didn't just now. No, Jungkook admitted, his voice quieter but still firm, but you almost did, and you would've if I hadn't stopped you. Jimin scoffed, shaking his head, but there was no real argument in his expression this time. Because part of him knew. Jungkook wasn't entirely wrong. That doesn't mean you get to control the moment, Jimin said, his voice lower now, more controlled but still charged with emotion. You don't get to decide when it happens or how it happens. I'm not trying to control it, Jungkook said, I'm trying to make it real. It is real, Jimin snapped again, frustration breaking through. Why do you keep acting like it is? Because you keep treating it like something temporary. The words collided between them, loud, sharp, impossible to ignore. Jimin went still. Jungkook exhaled, his shoulders rising and falling as he tried to steady himself again. I don't want to be something you almost chose, he said, quieter now, but the weight of it was heavier than anything he'd said before. I don't want to be a moment you think about and wonder what would have happened if you just stayed a little longer. Jimin's chest tightened painfully. You're not, he said again, but the words felt weaker this time. Then prove it, Jungkook said. Silence. A long suffocating silence. Jimin looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time there was no anger left in his expression. Only something raw. Something honest. You want me to prove it? Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jimin took a slow step forward again. Then another. Until the distance between them disappeared once more. This time, there was no hesitation in his movements. No stopping halfway. No pulling back. His hand came up again, but instead of grabbing Jungkook's collar, it slid to the back of his neck, fingers threading lightly into damp hair. Jungkook's breath hit sharply. Stop thinking so much, Jimin whispered, his voice softer now but no less intense, just this once. Jungkook's hands instinctively moved, one settling at Jimin's waist, the other steadying against his arm as if bracing for something inevitable. Jimin. But he didn't get to finish. Because this time, Jimin didn't stop. He closed the distance. And the moment finally broke. The world seemed to tilt the moment their lips met, not violently, not in some overwhelming cinematic explosion, but in a way that felt quieter and far more dangerous, like something fundamental had shifted beneath their feet. For a second, neither of them moved. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was careful, almost hesitant. As if both of them were testing whether this was real or just another moment they would later pretend never happened. Jungkook's hand tightened slightly at Jimin's waist, instinctive, grounding, while Jimin's fingers at the back of his neck held him there, not forcefully, but with enough certainty to make it clear he wasn't pulling away this time. The rain continued to fall around them, soft but steady, blurring the edges of the city until it felt like the entire world had narrowed down to this single point. This single moment. Jungkook was the first to react. Not by pulling away, but by breathing in sharply. Like the reality of it had finally caught up to him. His other hand moved, hesitant at first, then more certain, sliding up Jimin's arm as if he needed to feel that he was really there. That this wasn't something imagined. Jimin felt it. The shift. The hesitation melting into something more certain. And that was what broke the last piece of restraint inside him. He deepened the contact not recklessly but with intent, with a kind of quiet urgency that spoke louder than anything either of them had said. Jungkook responded immediately. There was no more hesitation now. No more waiting. The careful distance they had held onto for so long collapsed completely, replaced by something raw, something undeniable. Jungkook's grip tightened at Jimin's waist, pulling him closer, eliminating even the smallest space that remained between them. The movement was instinctive, almost desperate, like he had spent too long holding back and didn't know how to do it anymore. Jimin's breath hitched, but he didn't pull away. Didn't even try. For a moment, everything else disappeared, the noise, the expectations, the consequences Jimin had been so afraid of. All of it faded beneath the overwhelming reality of this. Of them. But reality has a way of returning. And it came back fast. Jungkook. The voice cut through the rain like a sharp blade. Both of them froze instantly. The moment shattered, not completely, not erased, but interrupted in a way that made it impossible to ignore the world they had just tried to forget. Jimin pulled back first. Not abruptly. But enough. Enough to break the contact, enough to force space back between them. Both of them were breathing unevenly now, their foreheads almost touching, their eyes locked in a stunned silence. For a split second, neither of them turned toward the voice. As if they were both hopping, just for one more second that they could stay in that moment a little longer. Jungkook, what the hell are you doing? This time there was no ignoring it. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Slowly, reluctantly, he turned his head. Through the rain, a figure approached quickly, their expression sharp, unreadable from a distance but unmistakably tense. Jimin stepped back fully this time. The cold hit immediately. Not just from the rain, but from the reality crashing back in. There it was. Everything he had been trying to avoid. Everything he had warned about. And it had taken less than a second to arrive. Jungkook didn't move away from where he stood. Didn't try to hide. Didn't even attempt to create distance between himself and Jimin. That alone said too much. Cut, the voice shouted again, closer now, harsher. We're still rolling, do you even realize that? Jimin's heart dropped. What? He whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Jungkook's expression shifted slightly, but he didn't look surprised.
In that.
That made it worse. You knew? Jimin asked, his voice low, almost disbelieving.
Jungkook hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second.
I didn't care, he admitted. Jimin stared at him, shock flashing across his face. You didn't, he stopped himself, running a hand through his hair again, his breath uneven. Do you have any idea what you've just done?
Yes, Jungkook said. Too quickly. Too calmly.
And that only made Jimin's frustration spike. No, you don't, Jimin snapped, his voice rising despite himself. Because if you did, you wouldn't have. Wouldn't have what? Jungkook cut in, his own voice sharpening now. Wouldn't have been honest, wouldn't have stopped pretending in front of everyone. In front of everyone is exactly the problem, Jimin shot back, gesturing vaguely toward the approaching figure, toward the blurred silhouettes of the crew in the distance. You said you wanted it to be real, Jungkook replied. This is real. Jimin let out a frustrated breath, shaking his head. This isn't real, this is reckless. Maybe it's both. The argument hung between them, heavy and unresolved. The approaching footsteps grew louder.
Closer.
Jimin's chest tightened again, panic creeping in now, sharp and undeniable. This is exactly what I was talking about, he said, his voice dropping, more controlled but no less intense. You don't think about what happens after. Jungkook stepped closer again, ignoring the distance Jimin had just created. I am thinking about it. Then act like it, Jimin snapped. Because right now it just looks like you don't care about the consequences at all.
Jungkook's expression hardened.
I care, he said quietly. I just don't care more than I care about you. The words hit harder than anything else.
Jimin froze.
For a second, everything else faded again, not the world, not the situation, but the noise in his own head.
Because that
was the one thing he hadn't been prepared for. Before he could respond, the figure finally reached them. Do you two have any idea what kind of situation you've just created? The voice was sharp, controlled, but barely masking the tension underneath. Jimin turned slowly, his expression already shifting, rebuilding the walls he had just let fall.
But it was too late.
Because whatever had just happened, it wasn't something that could be undone anymore. The rain didn't stop, but everything else did. The crew member stood just a few steps away now, soaked but unmoving, their eyes darting between Jimin and Jungkook with a sharpness that cut deeper than any raised voice could. Jimin felt it instantly, that shift, the invisible lines snapping back into place, the world they had just stepped out of rushing back in with brutal clarity. What exactly do you think you're doing? The voice demanded again, lower now but far more dangerous.
Jimin was the first to recover. Or at least the first to try.
It was part of the scene, he said quickly, his tone controlled, professional, almost too smooth. We were improvising.
The lie slid out easily. Too easily.
Jungkook's head turned slightly toward him, not fully but enough.
Enough to notice. Enough to react.
That's not what it looked like, the crew member replied sharply. Jimin didn't hesitate. That's because you're not seeing the full context.
The words were precise, calculated, safe.
And Jungkook hated every second of it.
That's not true.
Jungkook's voice cut through the moment, calm but unyielding.
Jimin's breath caught.
The crew member stilled. The rain suddenly sounded louder again. Jimin turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Jungkook, with a warning that didn't need to be spoken.
Don't.
But Jungkook didn't look away.
Didn't back down.
You said you wanted it to be real, Jungkook continued, his voice steady, unwavering. So why are you pretending again? The words hit harder than the rain. Jimin's jaw tightened, something sharp flashing across his face before he masked it again. This isn't the time, Jimin said under his breath, low enough that only Jungkook could hear but firm enough to carry weight. When is it then? Jungkook shot back immediately, his voice still controlled but now carrying an edge. Because every time it matters you decide it's not the right moment. Jungkook, Jimin warned. But it wasn't a warning Jungkook intended to listen to. No, Jungkook said louder now, turning fully toward him. You don't get to shut this down just because someone's watching. That's exactly why I have to shut it down, Jimin snapped, his control finally slipping, the tension spilling out. this isn't just about us anymore. The crew member stepped closer, clearly trying to intervene, but neither of them paid attention. Not now. Not when everything was unraveling. It was always about us, Jungkook said, his voice quieter again but heavier. You're the one who keeps dragging everything else into it. Jimin let out a frustrated breath, running a hand through his wet hair again, packing a step before stopping abruptly. You really don't understand, Jimin said, turning back to him, his eyes sharp, emotions clashing violently beneath the surface. The second this becomes something people can see, it stops being ours. Jungkook frowned, and what is it right now, because it doesn't feel like it's ours when you keep acting like it doesn't exist. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? Jungkook demanded. Because from where I'm standing it looks like you're choosing everything else over this. That's not fair, Jimin said, quieter now, but the tension in his voice was undeniable. Then stop making it true. Silence fell again. Heavy. The kind that presses down until it's almost unbearable. The crew member exhaled sharply, clearly losing patience. This isn't just some personal disagreement you can have in the middle of a shoot. Do you realize how many cameras were still rolling? Jimin's stomach dropped again. Jungkook didn't react the same way. Or at least not visibly. How much did you see? Jimin asked, his voice controlled again but tighter now. All of it, the crew member replied. The words landed like a blow. Jimin closed his eyes briefly, just for a second, as if trying to steady himself before everything spiraled completely out of control. This can't leave this set, Jimin said, more to himself than anyone else, but the urgency in his voice was clear. That's not entirely up to you, the crew member said. Jungkook let out a quiet breath, his gaze shifting between them before settling back on Jimin. You're already trying to contain it, he said softly. Jimin's eyes snapped back to him. Of course I am. And you don't see how that proves my point. Jimin's patience snapped. Your point? He repeated, his voice rising again. Your point is that we should just let this explode, that we should risk everything we've built because you decided now was the time to stop holding back. Yes, Jungkook said. No hesitation. No doubt. Just yes. The certainty in his voice made something in Jimin falter. You don't mean that, Jimin said, quieter now. I do, Jungkook replied, because what we've built doesn't mean anything if it forces us to lie about something this important. Jimin stared at him, something breaking open again, something raw and unguarded. And what happens when that honesty destroys everything? Jimin asked. Jungkook stepped closer. What if it does? He asked back. Jimin shook his head immediately. That's not how this works. Maybe not, Jungkook admitted, but avoiding it isn't working either. The truth of that lingered. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. Jimin exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping slightly, the weight of everything pressing down on him all at once. You think I don't want this, he said quietly. Jungkook didn't answer. He didn't need to. I do, Jimin continued, his voice breaking just enough to reveal the truth beneath it. That's the problem, I wanted enough to know what it could cost. Jungkook's expression softened slightly, but he didn't step back. Then why does it feel like you're the only one allowed to decide that? He asked. Jimin hesitated. Because there was no easy answer. Because part of him knew. He had been deciding for both of them. I'm trying to protect us, Jimin said finally. Jungkook shook his head. You're trying to control the outcome. That's the same thing. It's not, Jungkook said firmly. Protecting something means letting it exist. Controlling it means suffocating it before it has a chance to become anything real. Jimin fell silent. The words hit deeper than he wanted to admit. The crew member shifted again, clearly aware that this had gone far beyond anything they were supposed to be dealing with. This conversation isn't finished, they said more cautiously now, but we need to stop this here, now. Jimin nodded automatically. Jungkook didn't. His eyes were still on Jimin. Still searching. Still waiting. And for a moment, Jimin didn't look away. Not this time. Not immediately. Because despite everything, despite the chaos, the consequences, the fear creeping back in, he couldn't deny it anymore. Not to Jungkook. Not to himself. But knowing the truth. and knowing what to do with it. Those were two very different things. And as the rain finally began to ease, leaving the city quieter, heavier, and far more exposed than before, Jimin realized something that unsettled him more than anything else. There was no going back. Only forward. And forward meant choosing. They didn't go back to the scene. Not immediately. The set dissolved into controlled chaos behind them, voices layered over each other, equipment being checked, someone arguing about footage, someone else already making calls that shouldn't have been necessary. But Jimin and Jungkook stood just outside of it all, under the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, the rain now reduced to a thin mist clinging to the air. It felt quieter, but not calmer. Jimin crossed his arms not out of comfort but to hold himself together. His clothes were still damp, his hair clinging to his forehead, his breath uneven in a way he couldn't quite fix. "You shouldn't have said anything," he muttered, not looking at Jungkook this time. Jungkook let out a quiet breath. "You mean I shouldn't have told the truth?" "I mean you shouldn't have said it like that," Jimin snapped, turning toward him, frustration rising again. "In front of them, in the middle of everything. Do you have any idea what kind of situation we're in now?" "Yes," Jungkook replied, his voice steady, "one where we stop lying." Jimin let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "You really think this is that simple?" "No," Jungkook said, "but I think it's necessary." Jimin shook his head, packing a few steps before stopping again, his thoughts racing too fast to settle. "Necessary for who?" "For me," Jungkook said immediately, then after a beat softer, "for us." Jimin looked at him, then really looked at him, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that might make this easier to push away. There was none. "That's exactly the problem," Jimin said quietly. "You've already decided what this is, you've already decided what it means." "And you haven't?" Jungkook asked. Jimin didn't answer. Because that silence. It was an answer. Jungkook stepped closer, not aggressively, not forcing anything, but enough to make it clear he wasn't going to let Jimin retreat into distance again. "You felt it too," Jungkook said. "Back there, you can't tell me that didn't mean something." Jimin exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the wet pavement, watching the distorted reflections ripple under his shoes. "It meant something," he admitted. The words came out quieter than expected. But they were real. Jungkook's breath caught slightly, the tension in his shoulders shifting, not disappearing but changing. "Then why are we still arguing about it?" he asked. "Because meaning isn't enough," Jimin replied, lifting his gaze again, something heavier settling into his expression. "Not here, not like this." Jungkook frowned. "You keep saying that, but you're not telling me what this actually is." Jimin hesitated. Then slowly he said, "This is a situation where everything we do gets watched, recorded, interpreted, twisted into something else." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "So what, we just give them something fake instead?" "It's not about fake or real," Jimin said. "It's about control, about knowing what we show and what we keep." "And you think this," Jungkook gestured between them, his voice tightening, "is something you can just keep hidden like that?" Jimin didn't answer immediately. Because deep down, he knew the answer. "No," he said finally, "but that doesn't mean we expose it like this either." Jungkook let out a breath, his frustration rising again. "Then when, Jimin, when does it become okay? When do you stop treating this like something dangerous?" Jimin's expression shifted, something sharper returning. "It is dangerous. Only because you're afraid of it." "No," Jimin said firmly, "because I know what it can do." Jungkook tilted his head slightly, studying him. "Then tell me." Jimin hesitated. And this time the hesitation was heavier. "More personal." "It changes everything," he said quietly. "Not just for us, for how people see us, for how we're expected to act, for every decision we make after this." Jungkook's voice softened slightly. "And that scares you?" Jimin let out a humorless breath. "It should scare you too." Jungkook shook his head. "It doesn't, not enough to make me ignore this." Jimin looked away again, his chest tightening. "You're not thinking long-term." "I am," Jungkook insisted. "I'm just not letting fear decide everything for me." Jimin's patience snapped again, but this time it came out quieter, more controlled, more dangerous. "And what if this isn't just fear, what if it's experience?" That caught Jungkook off guard. "What does that mean?" he asked. Jimin didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, his gaze fixed somewhere distant, as if he were looking at something that wasn't there anymore. I've seen what happens when lines like this get crossed, Jimin said finally. I've seen people lose more than they gain. Jungkook's expression shifted, something uneasy flickering through it. You're not talking about people, are you? Jimin stayed silent. That was enough. Jungkook's voice dropped, more careful now. You've been through this before. Jimin let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face as if the admission itself was exhausting. Not exactly like this, he said, but close enough to know how it ends. Jungkook's chest tightened. And how does it end? He asked quietly. Jimin looked at him then. And there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just fear. Not just hesitation. Something deeper. Something that lingered. Someone always walks away, Jimin said. The words settled heavily between them. Jungkook didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, absorbing it, processing it, letting it sink in. And you think that's going to be us, he said finally. Jimin didn't answer. Because he didn't know. And that uncertainty. That was what scared him the most. Jungkook stepped closer again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if approaching something fragile. What if it doesn't end like that? He asked. Jimin let out a quiet breath. You don't know that. No, Jungkook admitted, but neither do you. Silence. The kind that forces the truth to sit there, unavoidable. Jimin's shoulders dropped slightly, the weight of everything pressing down harder now. You're asking me to take a risk I'm not sure I can recover from, he said. Jungkook's voice softened, and you're asking me to walk away from something I know I won't recover from if I lose it. That hit. Jimin's breath caught, his chest tightening again as the words settled into something deeper than argument. Jungkook took another step closer. Do you really think we'll be okay if we just pretend this never happened? He asked. Jimin hesitated. Because he knew the answer. No, he admitted quietly. Jungkook nodded slightly. Then why are we still trying to choose that option? Jimin didn't respond. Not immediately. Because for the first time, it wasn't about choosing between right and wrong. It was about choosing between two different kinds of loss. And neither of them felt easier. The mist in the air thickened slightly, the city lights dimming as clouds shifted overhead, leaving everything softer, quieter, more uncertain. Jimin looked at Jungkook again, really looked at him as if trying to memorize this version of him, the one standing here, refusing to let go, refusing to make this easy. You're not going to let this go, are you? Jimin asked. Jungkook shook his head. No. Jimin let out a slow breath. Then, almost reluctantly, he stepped closer again. Not as close as before, but close enough. Then stop pushing so hard, Jimin said quietly. Because if we're going to figure this out, we can't do it like this. Jungkook studied him, searching for something in his expression. What does that mean? He asked. Jimin hesitated. Then slowly. It means we don't run, he said, but we don't explode everything either. Jungkook's brow furrowed slightly. That sounds like another way of saying we wait. Jimin shook his head. No, it means we choose carefully. Jungkook considered that. And for the first time since everything began. He didn't argue immediately. The tension didn't disappear. The conflict didn't resolve. But something shifted. Not an ending. Not a solution. Just a pause. A fragile, uncertain middle ground. And somehow, that felt even more dangerous than everything that had come before. The pause didn't last. It never did with them. The moment Jimin stepped back into the building, the world swallowed him whole again. Bright lights, damp cables snaking across the floor, voices layered with urgency and irritation. Someone handed him a towel he barely registered. Someone else called his name twice before he responded, his mind still somewhere outside under that dying rain. Jungkook followed a few steps behind. Not close enough to touch. Not far enough to disappear. In that distance, it felt louder than any argument they had just had. Where have you been? The director's voice cut through the noise, sharp and impatient. We lost 10 minutes, 10. Jimin straightened instinctively, slipping back into something controlled, something familiar. We got caught in the rain. I needed a minute to reset. The lie came easier now.
Too easy.
Jungkook stopped a few feet away, watching him, saying nothing, but his silence felt heavier than any accusation. Reset later, the director snapped. We're already behind, we're rolling again in 5. Jimin nodded, already turning away, already slipping back into position, into role, into the version of himself that didn't break in the middle of a scene.
But Jungkook didn't move.
5 minutes, the director repeated, then walked off, muttering something under his breath. The space cleared slightly, crew scattering back into their tasks, the set rebuilding itself around them like nothing had happened. Like everything hadn't just changed. Jimin exhaled slowly, dragging the towel over his hair, grounding himself in routine.
Then, you're really good at that.
Jungkook's voice came from behind him, low, controlled, but edged with something sharp.
Jimin stilled.
At what? He asked without turning. At pretending nothing happened. Jimin closed his eyes for a second.
Of course. Of course it wasn't over.
He turned slowly, meeting Jungkook's gaze again. You said we needed to be careful, Jimin replied, his tone measured. This is what careful looks like. Jungkook let out a quiet, humorless laugh. No, this is what hiding looks like. Jimin's jaw tightened. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Jimin stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you want everyone here to start asking questions? Do you want them to replay what just happened from 10 different angles and come to their own conclusions? Jungkook didn't back down. They're already doing that.
Then don't make it worse.
The words came out sharper than intended. Jungkook's expression hardened. You think I'm the one making it worse. I think you don't realize how fast things spiral once they start, Jimin shot back. You think you're controlling this, but you're not.
And you are, Jungkook challenged.
At least I'm trying. Jungkook shook his head, stepping closer, his voice dropping. No, you're trying to contain something that's already out. Jimin's breath hitched slightly, but he held his ground. Then help me contain it, Jimin said, instead of pushing it further. Jungkook stared at him for a long moment. You want me to act like nothing happened, he said. I want you to act like it matters enough not to destroy it, Jimin replied. That's not the same thing. No, Jimin admitted quietly, it's not. Silence fell between them again, but this time it wasn't just tension, it was something more unstable, something ready to tip either way. You said we don't run, Jungkook said finally. Jimin nodded once, we don't. Then why does this feel like you're already halfway out the door? The question lingered.
Heavy.
Jimin didn't answer immediately. Because part of him, a part he didn't want to admit, knew exactly why. I'm not leaving, Jimin said finally, his voice quieter now. Jungkook studied him, then stop acting like you are. Before Jimin could respond, a voice cut in. We're ready. The moment snapped. Again. Jimin exhaled slowly, stepping back, putting space between them, but this time it felt different, not like retreat but like something unfinished being forced to pause. We'll finish this later, Jimin said. Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. You always say that. And I mean it this time. Jungkook didn't look convinced. But he didn't argue either. Not now. Not here. They took their places. The set lights burned brighter now, artificial and unforgiving, casting everything into sharp clarity. The rain machine had been adjusted, ready to recreate what had just happened naturally, ironically, artificially. Positions, someone called out. Jimin stepped into frame, his posture shifting, his expression settling into something the camera could understand. Jungkook stepped in across from him. The distance between them was scripted now. Measured. Controlled. But their eyes betrayed everything. Rolling, the director shouted. Action! For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jimin spoke his line. But it came out different this time. Less practiced. More real. And Jungkook noticed immediately. You're not supposed to look at me like that, Jimin said, the line blurring with something deeper. Jungkook took a step forward, following the script, but not entirely. Like what? He asked. Jimin hesitated. Because suddenly, he didn't know if he was still acting. Like you mean it, Jimin said. Jungkook held his gaze, something shifting again beneath the surface. What if I do? The line wasn't in the script. A murmur rippled through the crew.
Jimin felt it. He should correct it. Pull it back. Return to what was planned. But instead, he stepped closer.
Then you're making a mistake, Jimin said, but his voice didn't sound convincing anymore.
Jungkook's expression softened just slightly.
Or maybe I'm finally doing something right.
Another unscripted line. Another shift. The tension on set thickened. Stay on script, someone whispered urgently.
But neither of them listened.
Because suddenly, the script felt irrelevant.
What happens after this? Jimin asked, his voice barely above a whisper now, the question no longer fictional.
Jungkook didn't hesitate.
We find out. The words hung in the air.
Real. Too real.
Jimin's breath caught. And for a moment, everything blurred again.
The lights. The crew. The cameras.
All of it fading beneath the weight of something they could no longer separate from reality.
Cut. The shout came too late.
Because by then, everyone had already seen it. No one clapped after the cut. No one moved. The silence that followed wasn't the usual kind, the kind that waits for direction, for correction, for another take. This silence was heavier, charged with something unspoken that everyone felt but no one dared to name.
Jimin could feel it pressing against his skin. Eyes. Too many eyes. Watching. Measuring. Questioning.
He stepped back first, instinctively breaking the proximity that had once again blurred the line between acting and truth. His chest rose and fell slowly, but his pulse was still racing, his thoughts tangled in a way that made it hard to separate what just happened from what it meant.
That wasn't in the script. The director's voice came out flat. Not angry. Not yet. Just controlled. And that was worse.
Jimin swallowed, forcing his expression into something neutral, something explainable. We were trying to make the moment more natural.
It sounded weak. Even to him. Jungkook didn't speak.
He just stood there, eyes still on Jimin, as if the rest of the world had faded out again. The director stepped closer, gaze shifting between them. Natural is one thing that, he paused, searching for the word, that was something else.
No one interrupted. No one disagreed. Because everyone had seen it. Not just the lines. Not just the performance. But the truth bleeding through it.
Jimin felt his throat tighten. We can redo it.
The director didn't answer immediately.
Instead, he studied them both, the silence stretching longer than it should.
Then,
no, he said.
The word landed heavier than expected.
Jimin blinked. No. That wasn't a mistake, the director continued slowly. It just wasn't what we planned.
Jimin's chest tightened further. That wasn't better. If anything, it was worse.
Because it meant the moment had value.
Meaning.
And that meant it wouldn't be ignored. We'll take 10, the director added, turning away slightly. Everyone reset.
The tension didn't dissolve. It just shifted.
Crew members moved again, quieter this time, more cautious, as if stepping too loudly might break something fragile. Jimin turned away immediately, needing distance, needing space to think, to breathe, to rebuild whatever control he had just lost.
But he didn't get far.
Running away again.
Jungkook's voice was right behind him. Close. Too close. Jimin stopped. Closed his eyes for a brief second. Then turned.
I'm not running, he said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. Jungkook tilted his head slightly, studying him. Then what do you call that? Taking a break, Jimin replied, sharper now, something we're supposed to do after a scene like that.
A scene, Jungkook repeated quietly.
Jimin's jaw tightened. Don't start. I'm not starting anything, Jungkook said. I'm continuing something you keep trying to pause. Jimin exhaled, frustrated. We are at work.
And that suddenly changes what just happened, Jungkook asked. It changes how we handle it.
Jungkook stepped closer, his voice lowering. No, it changes how you hide it. Jimin's patience snapped again, but this time the anger came out quieter, more dangerous. You think I'm hiding? He said, stepping forward too, closing the gap again despite himself. You think standing in the middle of a set and letting everyone see everything is bravery.
I think it's honesty. I think it's reckless.
The words collided between them again, sharp and immediate. Jungkook didn't flinch, then why didn't you stop it? Jimin froze. For just a second. But it was enough. You could have pulled back, Jungkook continued, his voice quieter now but cutting deeper. You could have corrected the lines, stepped away, reminded everyone it was just acting. Jimin didn't respond. Because he couldn't. Because he hadn't. And you didn't, Jungkook finished. The truth settled heavily between them. Jimin looked away, running a hand through his hair again, his thoughts spiraling. That doesn't mean anything, he muttered. Jungkook let out a quiet breath. You know it does. Jimin shook his head. It means I got caught up in the moment, that's it. Then why are you still affected by it? Jungkook pressed. I'm not. Stop lying. The words came out firmer this time. Not loud. But undeniable. Jimin turned back sharply, his eyes flashing. I'm not lying. Then look at me and say it again, Jungkook said. Jimin held his gaze. Opened his mouth. And stopped. Because the truth sat right there, refusing to be shaped into something else. Jungkook saw it. Of course he did. You can't even say it, he whispered. Jimin's chest tightened painfully, because you're making it bigger than it is. Or maybe you're still trying to make it smaller. Silence. Again. But this time, it felt like something was breaking under the weight of it. Jimin's voice dropped, quieter now, almost exhausted. You don't understand what this looks like from the outside. Jungkook shook his head slightly. I don't care what it looks like from the outside. That's easy for you to say. Why? Jungkook challenged. Because I'm not the one trying to control every outcome. Because you're not thinking about what happens when people start asking questions we can't answer. Jungkook stepped closer again, his voice softening just slightly. Then maybe we stop pretending we don't have answers. Jimin laughed under his breath, but it sounded tired, strained. You really think it's that simple? No, Jungkook admitted, but I think it's simpler than you're making it. Jimin looked at him, something conflicted shifting again beneath the surface. You're asking me to be okay with losing control, he said. Jungkook's expression softened. I'm asking you to trust something you already feel. Jimin's breath hitched. For a moment, everything else faded again. The noise. The set. The pressure. All of it shrinking beneath the weight of that one truth. You're not giving me time, Jimin whispered. Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. You've had time. That's not the same thing. Then what is? Jungkook asked. Jimin hesitated. Then slowly. Time where everything isn't falling apart around us, he said. Jungkook studied him for a long moment. Then nodded once. Okay, he said quietly. Jimin blinked, caught off guard. Okay. Jungkook stepped back for the first time in a while, creating space, not distance but space. We finish this here, he said. We do what we have to do. Jimin watched him carefully, uncertain. And then, he asked. Jungkook held his gaze. And then you stop running. The words weren't forceful this time. They weren't sharp. They were steady. Certain. And somehow. That made them harder to resist. Jimin exhaled slowly, something in his shoulders loosening just slightly. Fine, he said quietly. It wasn't a full agreement. Not yet. But it wasn't rejection either. And Jungkook noticed that. Of course he did. 10 minutes, someone called out in the distance. The world started moving again. But this time, it didn't feel the same. Because no matter how carefully they tried to contain it, something had already slipped through. And everyone had seen enough to start asking questions they wouldn't be able to ignore for much longer. The questions did come. Not all at once, not loudly, not in a way that could be easily confronted and dismissed, but in fragments. In glances that lingered too long. In conversations that paused when either of them entered the room. In whispers that dissolved into silence the moment they got too close. Jimin felt it everywhere. In the way the stylist's hands hesitated slightly when fixing his collar. In the way the assistant avoided meeting his eyes when handing him a script that had already been revised 3 times in one day. In the way the director watched him, not with irritation anymore but with something far more dangerous. Curiosity. And underneath that, recognition. Jungkook, on the other hand, didn't seem to change. Or maybe he did, but in a way that made everything sharper, clearer, more intentional. He didn't avoid Jimin, didn't create distance for the sake of comfort. If anything, he became more present. More precise in every look, every word, every moment they shared on and off camera. And that made it harder. Because Jimin could no longer pretend that what existed between them was accidental. It was. It had never been. The final scene of the shoot was scheduled at night. Of course it was. The city had been washed clean by the rain earlier, leaving behind streets that glowed under neon reflections, the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet pavement and something electric that seemed to linger just beneath the surface. It was almost identical to that night. Almost. Last scene, the director announced, his voice echoing slightly in the open street, "Let's make it count." No one missed the way his gaze lingered on Jimin and Jungkook when he said it. The setup was simple. Two characters. One moment. A choice that would define everything that came after. Jimin stood under the umbrella first this time, his fingers tightening slightly around the handle as he watched the artificial rain begin to fall again, each drop catching the light like shattered glass. He heard Jungkook approach before he saw him. Felt it more accurately. The shift in the air. The quiet pull of something familiar and inevitable. When Jungkook stepped into the frame, into the shelter of the umbrella, everything else seemed to fade again, not completely, not dangerously this time, but enough. Enough to feel real. "Ready?" someone called. Jimin didn't answer. Neither did Jungkook. Rolling. The world narrowed. Action. For a moment they simply stood there. Close. Not touching. But aware of every inch between them. Jimin looked up first. And this time, there was no hesitation. "You always stop here," he said, the line soft, steady. Jungkook's gaze held his, unwavering. "Because you're always here." The script. But also, not. Jimin exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing in a way that surprised him. "Not everything stays the same," he replied. Jungkook stepped a fraction closer, just enough to close the distance that had once felt impossible. "Some things do," he said quietly. Jimin searched his eyes. Not for the answer, but for the courage to accept it. "And if they do?" Jimin asked. Jungkook didn't look away. "Then we choose what we keep." The rain continued to fall around them, soft and endless, the city lights flickering like distant memories. Jimin felt something shift inside him. Not a breaking. Not a collapse. But a release. A quiet, steady understanding that settled into place where fear had once been. "You make it sound easy," Jimin said, though his voice no longer carried resistance. Jungkook shook his head slightly. "It's not." "Then why do it?" Jungkook's answer came without hesitation. "Because some things are worth the risk." The words hung between them. Simple. Uncomplicated. And yet, they carried everything. Jimin's grip on the umbrella loosened slightly. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about who might be watching. He wasn't calculating outcomes or imagining consequences or trying to reshape the moment into something safer. He was just there. With him. "Then let's stop pretending we don't know what this is," Jimin said quietly. Jungkook's expression softened, not in surprise but in recognition. Like he had been waiting for those words. "Okay," he replied. No tension. No argument. Just acceptance. And somehow, that felt bigger than everything that had come before. Jimin let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The rain slowed. Or maybe it just felt that way. Because for the first time, it wasn't overwhelming. It was just background. Just noise. Just part of a moment that finally belonged to them. Cut. The director's voice came, but it didn't break anything this time. It didn't shatter the moment. Because the moment didn't need protecting anymore. Jimin and Jungkook didn't step away immediately. They didn't rush to separate, didn't rebuild the distance that had once defined everything between them. They just stood there. And that alone was enough. Around them, the crew began to move again, quieter than usual, more careful, as if instinctively understanding that something had reached its natural end. No one questioned it. Not out loud. Because some things, once seen clearly enough, didn't need explanation. Jimin finally lowered the umbrella. The rain, real or artificial, touched his skin again, cool and grounding. He glanced at Jungkook, a small, almost unnoticeable smile forming. "Guess we didn't ruin it," he said. Jungkook smiled back, softer but certain. "No," he replied, "we didn't." There were still questions. There would always be questions. But they didn't feel like threats anymore. Just possibilities. And for once, that was enough. As the lights dimmed and the set slowly dissolved back into reality, the city remained quiet, reflective, endless. And somewhere within it, not lost, not hidden, but simply there, was something they had finally chosen not to walk away from.